amidst biblical tales. God floods the earth, sparing Noah, his family, and 2 of every animal on board his ark.
Now, an international team of researchers have found new evidence that a famous formation in Turkey could be the site.
What if I told you 3 countries are fighting over a 6,000-year-old corpse they have never actually found? Not a tomb or a skeleton, just the idea of a man, a flood, and a promise that reshaped civilizations. As soil samples are being flown to labs and drone scans tracing buried ridgelines, political borders are shifting around an ancient name, Noah. From the dusty foothills of Mount Tendürek in Turkey to a sealed skeleton in a museum basement mislabeled for decades to the marble monument in Azerbaijan, Noah's legacy is being unearthed, rebranded, and weaponized. Why does everyone want to bury Noah in their backyard? Is it about faith, tourism, or something much deeper that still holds power in the modern world? This is not just about what lies beneath the earth. It is about who controls the story written above it. The Turkish time bomb. Let us start where the ground literally shifted this month beneath the jagged ridges of eastern Turkey at a lonely stretch near Mount Ararat, known as the Durupınar site, a name long whispered by explorers, dismissed by institutions, and now suddenly on every archaeologist's radar. Because in May 2025, something beneath that soil stirred more than dust. It cracked open a new layer in a debate as old as the flood itself. A multinational team, led by Turkish geoscientists, lowered their equipment onto the Durupınar formation once again, this time with more than just hope. Their ground-penetrating radar sliced through layers of hardened sediment, revealing linear cavities buried beneath the slope. Not random or chaotic, but patterned, long, rib-like structures traced down to the Earth's bedrock. According to their published report, some of the measurements match the biblical dimensions given in Genesis 6, including its length, width, and even curvature. But it did not stop at the radar. The team collected soil samples from a dozen depths, each analyzed for isotopic and mineral content. Their most startling claim? Elevated levels of potassium, manganese, and organic carbon. All of these are markers typically associated with decomposing timber. More specifically, the levels mirrored the breakdown rate of cedar wood, the very material long believed to have been used in constructing ancient vessels of ritual or preservation. And here lies the riddle that keeps skeptics uneasy. If this is just natural rock, why does the potassium content match decomposed cedar wood? If wind and water shaped this terrain, why are there symmetrical cavities underneath, each just wide enough to resemble the interior ribs of a massive ship? Yet not everyone is boarding this ark. Within days of the findings going public, Turkish geologist Dr. Oğuz Kaya issued a counterstatement. In it, he reasserted that the Durupınar formation was the result of mudflow and erosion patterns common to eastern Anatolia. No shipwreck, no miracle, just nature playing tricks on the human imagination. According to Kaya, tectonic shifts and sediment pressure can easily create shell-like layers in limestone, giving the illusion of structure where none exists. Still, the response from Ankara was unusually swift. Within 48 hours, the Turkish Ministry of Culture and Tourism released a polished press kit containing drone footage, subtitles in 6 different languages, and interviews with smiling archaeologists. The message was clear: Turkey might be sitting on the world's holiest shipwreck, and they intend to control the narrative. Privately, officials have begun sketching out plans for a permanent research facility near the site. Reports leaked from the Anadolu Agency suggest a proposed collaboration between Turkish universities and Middle Eastern antiquities ministries. However, American or Israeli archaeologists were notably absent. This is not merely about history, it is about sovereignty, regional pride, and the right to define sacred truth. Because if this really is Noah's Ark, or even perceived to be, then Turkey becomes the custodian of a religious relic that touches Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike. And in a region still pulsing with post-colonial tensions, that kind of influence is priceless. Pilgrimages would flood in, tourism revenue would spike, but more critically, cultural legitimacy and the right to claim divine history would quietly shift toward Ankara. Of course, none of this means the discovery is definitive. Even the lead scientists admit the formation may never yield human remains or wooden fragments. The tectonic activity over millennia has likely vaporized anything delicate, and yet there is something different this time. The layers seem to fracture around a central beam like pressure once resistance is met, but perhaps the most fascinating development is not buried underground, it sits above, in glass cabinets across dusty museums. Forgotten fragments retrieved during the 1960 excavations by Ron Wyatt and others, like ceramic shards and fossilized wood veins, have begun resurfacing. One Turkish official has hinted that those earlier samples may now be reanalyzed under modern spectrometry. If proven to match the May 2025 soil samples, the implications would ripple far beyond Anatolia. Even now, rumors churn beneath the formal announcements, whispers of foreign intelligence agencies monitoring the site, the quiet arrival of private American donors offering neutral funding. Israeli archaeologists denied visas without explanation, and Turkish local guides were required to sign non-disclosure forms. It is a dig site, but also a battlefield, one where truth, politics, and prophecy collide. And yet, one question rings loudest. If this really is Noah's final resting place, why has it taken the world this long to take it seriously? The site has been visible for decades, so why now? Is it the timing of the technology, or is something larger being orchestrated behind the scenes? Whatever the reason, the game has changed. What once seemed like a fringe obsession has now become a matter of national image and global influence. The Turkish government is not treating this as archaeology, they are treating it as inheritance. It is as if some sacred key has been pulled from the floodwaters, and only they can decide who gets to hold it. But what if Turkey is not the only player in this ancient game? What if the real competition over Noah's grave has only just begun? Grave robbers of the Caucasus. While Turkey digs, Azerbaijan builds. It is a tale as old as empire. One nation excavates, the other erects. In the shadowy footnotes of modern archaeology, the hunt for Noah's grave has become less a biblical pilgrimage and more a geopolitical chess game. And in this contest of memory and monument, Azerbaijan made its move early. In the dry, windswept province of Nakhchivan, nestled between the snowy heights of Armenia and the steppes of Iran, a peculiar mausoleum rises in beige stone and local myth. Officially dubbed Noah's Mausoleum, the structure stands in the city's southeastern district, quiet and poised, marked by 8-sided walls and a pointed dome that seems to resist the slow decay of centuries. But this is no untouched relic. The original tomb, which was much older, rougher, and wrapped in regional legend, once sat beneath the same soil. However, when Soviet artillery erased it in the 1950s, what followed was not preservation, it was a reinvention. In 2006, under the soft spotlight of nation-building and Islamic revivalism, the Azerbaijani government reconstructed the site from scratch. Visitors were told they stood where Noah once walked. Tour brochures now speak confidently of the prophet's final resting place, which is right here, mere feet below ground, sealed beneath polished stone and official narrative. But Nakhchivan's spiritual reclamation came at a cost. Less than 200 kilometers away, the Armenian Church of St. Thomas, the only medieval Christian site known to have once claimed Noah's tomb, was quietly bulldozed between 1997 and 2005. The destruction, meticulously hidden from Western media at the time, erased centuries of carvings, relics, and memories. And it was not alone. Satellite footage confirmed that hundreds of Armenian kachkas, that's French for ornately carved tombstones, were flattened across Nakhchivan, not by accident, but by plan. This was not just a restoration, it was a replacement. While Turkish archaeologists tunneled into Mount Ararat's southern flank, searching for petrified wood and fossilized beams, Azerbaijan had already built its claim in concrete. And unlike Turkey's often halted digs, Nakhchivan's monument needed no permission slips or carbon dating. It only required belief and control of the land. But the region's faiths are many, and not all bowed to erasure. To the west, in Iraq's Nineveh province, a crumbling village named Hatara held its ground. There, atop a low hill near the Tigris, rests another contender for Noah's grave, a Yazidi mausoleum, known locally as Babe Noe. The structure, small and sun-bleached, escaped the destruction of ISIS not by power, but by obscurity and sheer stubborn presence. While militants razed churches and temples by the dozen, this one endured, protected by tight-knit families and a tradition too stubborn to die. The Yazidis, long persecuted and often misunderstood, believe Noah was not merely a patriarch, but an ancestral guide. In Hatara, they offer prayers at his tomb, not as myth, but as kin. The mausoleum, though simple, radiates an authenticity born of survival, not politics. In Azerbaijan, visitors arrive by coach bus, guided by polished signage and national pride. Admission is free, and photographs are encouraged. The site receives hundreds of visitors monthly, especially after being featured on the Azerbaijan travel platform. It is pristine, curated, and sterile in its certainty. Hatara, on the other hand, receives none of this. Pilgrims arrive on foot or by battered car, dodging checkpoints and fading roads. There are no glossy pamphlets or translation services, only memories passed down orally. The site receives barely a dozen outsiders per year, yet it remains untouched, authentic and unbought. Which of these Noah's tombs would you visit? The one that survived ISIS or the one that erased history? And what does it mean when a prophet becomes property? Because, make no mistake, Noah's bones, wherever they rest, have become currency. In Nakhchivan, his name sanctifies the nation's Islamic credentials, tying its secular past to religious legitimacy. In Hatara, he offers the Yazidis a sacred lineage few recognize and fewer defend. In both places, he draws a line between who gets to remember and who gets remembered. The question is no longer where he lies, it is who gets to decide. But while the Caucasus fights over territory and tradition, a quiet box in Philadelphia might be holding the real answer, and it has been collecting dust since 1941. The basement bones. Meet the skeleton that outlived empires in a cardboard box. While nations draw battle lines over contested soil and build monuments to carefully curated memories, another chapter of Noah's sprawling epic lay dormant, forgotten not in the shifting sands of the Middle East, but within the climate-controlled archives of Western academia. This is not a tale of grand discoveries announced under flashing cameras, but of quiet scholarship, dusty records, and a find so potent it was effectively misplaced for nearly a century. What if the most tangible link to the world of great floods was not found through ground-penetrating radar, but through a meticulous sift through a museum's own institutional memory, exposing secrets hidden in plain sight? The year was 1929. Sir Leonard Woolley, a titan of British archaeology, led a joint expedition from the University of Pennsylvania Museum and the British Museum into the searing plains of southern Iraq. Their destination was the ancient Sumerian metropolis, a city whispered to be the birthplace of Abraham and a nexus of early civilization. Woolley's team was not merely digging for artifacts, they hunted for the origins of myth, specifically evidence of the Great Flood that echoed through Sumerian, Akkadian, and biblical texts. Deep within the tell, they punched through layers of human occupation, past royal tombs glittering with gold and lapis lazuli. Then they hit something extraordinary, a sterile band of water-laid clay, nearly 10 feet thick, a silent testament to a cataclysmic inundation that had scoured the land thousands of years prior. Below this flood layer, life and burials resumed. Within these deep strata, dating to the Ubaid period, roughly between 5500 and 4000 BCE, Woolley's excavators unearthed the remains of an adult male, at least 50 years of age. He was carefully interred, a silent witness from a time before the great deluge that Woolley so famously chronicled. This skeleton was found to be a staggering 40 to 50 feet below the surface. It was older than the flood he was investigating. The significance was immense. A pre-Diluvian man, untouched by the waters that later redefined his world. The bones were shipped to the Penn Museum along with countless other treasures from destined, one would assume, for prominent study and display. Yet, somehow, amidst the museum's vast collections, this pivotal find vanished from academic discourse. relegated to an uncatalogued existence in a simple container. For 85 years, he waited. It was not until 2014 that Dr. William Hafford, a project manager involved in digitizing the Penn Museum's extensive Ur collection archives, stumbled upon an old index card. The notation was brief, almost cryptic, referencing a complete skeleton from Wooley's deep trenches. Intrigued, Hafford began a forensic journey through forgotten ledgers and storage rooms. He eventually located the remains, not in a climate-controlled vault, but in an ordinary box. The skull was crushed, likely by the immense pressure of the Earth over millennia, but the skeleton was otherwise intact. Because he was found so deep within these ancient flood deposits, museum staff had colloquially, perhaps prophetically, nicknamed him Noah. This man, who had walked the Earth centuries before the flood event Wooley identified at Ur, had become a ghost in his own afterlife, a casualty of institutional oversight, or perhaps, some might whisper, benign neglect. The rediscovery of Noah raises uncomfortable questions that extend far beyond the hallowed halls of the Penn Museum. How many other truths lie dormant in the basements and backrooms of the world's great repositories, casualties of limited funding, shifting research priorities, or simply the sheer volume of history humanity has unearthed? Museums are tasked as guardians of our collective past, yet they are also gatekeepers, curating the narratives presented to the public. What remains unseen, unstudied, or unacknowledged can be as telling as the artifacts illuminated under gallery lights. Are these vast collections truly accessible, or do they inadvertently become mausoleums where inconvenient or less glamorous discoveries are laid to rest, far from public scrutiny or scholarly debate? The story of this particular skeleton, so intimately tied to one of humanity's oldest and most resonant narratives, underscores a profound challenge. And this skeleton is not the only one that disappeared. In 1992, a set of ancient scroll fragments, believed to contain early Hebrew inscriptions, were rediscovered in a drawer at Oxford, mislabeled as Roman parchment. In Israel, drone footage recently led to the rediscovery of a forgotten Canaanite palace, partially excavated in the 1970s and abandoned mid-study. These are not just accidents, they are symptoms of a larger silence. So we ask again, how many more Noahs are sealed in boxes beneath universities, mislabeled, unfunded, or quietly shelved, because their stories do not fit the script? Should museums face penalties for losing history and allowing such significant pieces of our shared human story to fade into administrative obscurity for decades? What accountability exists or should be put in place when the guardians of memory seemingly forget? Comment below with your thoughts. Now, why are most of us so quick to sensationalize every new radar blip from Ararat, but consistently ignore this verifiable, tangible, smoking gun sitting in a Philadelphia museum? Clickbait versus science. Let us autopsy a viral lie, shall we? In the digital amphitheater, where history is spun into a spectacle, where algorithms reward audacity over accuracy, a peculiar breed of narrative flourishes. These are the tales that promise earth-shattering revelations with every click, the ones that whisper of ancient giants and conveniently discovered relics, all wrapped in a cloak of suppressed knowledge. We have all seen them, these slick productions that bypass the painstaking process of peer review and dive straight into pronouncements that would make seasoned archaeologists either weep or erupt in derisive laughter. They emerge, fully formed, often with dramatic drone shots over vaguely interesting rock formations, presenting conjecture as certainty and speculation as settled science. The formula is intoxicatingly simple. Find a legend, locate a mound, declare victory, and then accuse the mainstream of a cover-up. Consider the claims that often populate these digital spaces, sometimes featuring figures like the late Ron Wyatt, whose assertions about Noah's Ark, the Ark of the Covenant, and even Noah's grave near Mount Ararat continue to circulate widely. These narratives frequently suggest that definitive proof, perhaps even the bones of Noah himself, or colossal structures built by antediluvian giants, has been readily found, only to be ignored or actively hidden by a shadowy cabal of academics or media outlets afraid of the truth. Such videos often present visually compelling, yet geologically ambiguous sites as undeniable evidence, glossing over the complexities of sedimentology, tectonic activity, and the rigorous methodologies that define credible archaeological investigation. They build a world where every anomaly is a confirmation, every skeptic a conspirator. The question is not whether these claims are entertaining. The question is whether they bear any resemblance to the methodical pursuit of historical understanding. Now, let us juxtapose this with the cautious, often frustratingly slow, march of actual scientific inquiry regarding sites like Durupaynar in Turkey. Here, teams from respected universities employ advanced 3D scans, ground-penetrating radar, and electrical resistivity tomography, meticulously analyzing soil samples and geological strata. They find intriguing patterns and formations that sometimes align with historical descriptions, such as the boat-like shape at Durupaynar measuring close to the biblical dimensions of the Ark. Researchers might speak of parallel lines and right angles below the surface that are not expected in a natural geologic formation. Yet, in the same breath, these very scientists, like Dr. Fethi Ahmet Yüksel or Andrew Jones, emphasize the need for further research, more samples, and extensive non-destructive testing before any definitive pronouncements can be made. Geologists, meanwhile, often counter that these formations, however suggestive, can indeed be explained by natural geological processes, pointing out that the Durupaynar site, for instance, is primarily a limonite rock structure shaped by millennia of natural forces, not necessarily human hands. This is the dance of science: observation, hypothesis, rigorous testing, debate, and the slow accumulation of evidence, a stark contrast to the swift, declarative certitude of the clickbait chronicle. The allure of the sensational is undeniable. It feeds a deep human hunger for mystery solved, for faith affirmed by tangible proof, for a direct line to a past that often feels frustratingly out of reach. When a video promises the fully preserved secrets of Noah's Ark, complete with chambers and timber-like patterns discovered effortlessly, it taps into that desire for immediate gratification. The reality, however, involves years, sometimes decades, of meticulous work. It involves sifting through clayey materials, marine materials, and seafood remnants, as found in areas near Durupaynar, and carefully dating them to periods like 5500 to 3000 BC, attempting to correlate them with flood narratives without overstating the case. Professor Farooq Kaya, associated with research at the site, prudently stated, "It is not possible to say that the ship is here with the dating. We need to work for a long time to reveal this." This careful, qualified language is the hallmark of responsible investigation, a world away from the breathless pronouncements that dominate certain corners of the internet. So, where does this leave us? The consumers of content on platforms like YouTube. The platform itself has policies against misleading or deceptive content with serious risk of egregious harm, including technically manipulated content or content interfering with democratic processes. While a video making unsubstantiated claims about Noah's Ark might not be deemed to cause egregious harm in the same way as, say, medical misinformation, it contributes to an ecosystem where discerning fact from fiction becomes increasingly challenging. It blurs the lines, making it harder for genuine, albeit less sensational, discoveries to gain traction. The responsibility, then, falls not only on creators to present information ethically, but also on viewers to cultivate a healthy skepticism, seek out multiple perspectives, and understand the difference between an engaging story and verified history. It is about enjoying the what if without sacrificing the what is. But maybe we need to ask something deeper. Why do these stories hook us so powerfully? Why do millions lean in when someone whispers an ancient truth covered up by scientists? Because belief, even when fragile, is comforting. We crave mystery that confirms our worldview. We hunger for evidence that God or destiny left a signature in stone. For some, it is not about proof, it is about purpose. If Noah's Ark is real, then maybe the flood happened. And if the flood happened, maybe the world still has a plan. It is not just archaeology, it is an anchor. That is the emotional currency clickbait spends. Certainty disguised as curiosity. Have you ever shared an archaeology video you later realized was perhaps more fiction than fact, more entertainment than evidence. This is not about bones. Not really. It is about billion-dollar holy tourism empires, national pride, and the unending human quest to touch the sacred. The Noah Industrial Complex. Somewhere along the slope of Mount Ararat, long after the stones stopped speaking and the excavators fell silent, a different machine began to hum. It was not ancient or divine. It was modern, and it had one purpose: profit, because behind every mystery of faith lies an industry of belief, and in the case of Noah, that industry has gone global. Each year, over 30,000 visitors descend on the Doğu Bayazıt district in eastern Turkey, many of them drawn not by nature, but by a curiosity carved in rock. Government signs in multiple languages point boldly to the Durupanar site, widely claimed to be the resting place of Noah's Ark. Hotels rise beside shepherd villages, street vendors sell laminated replicas of gopher wood, and ticket booths quietly rake in over $3 million annually, according to local tourism bodies. The faithful arrive with Bibles, the curious arrive with cameras, and the region's economy thrives not on grain, but on Genesis. But Turkey is not alone. Azerbaijan, too, has joined the sacred stakes. In Nakhchivan, a remote autonomous republic bordering Armenia, a towering monument known as Noah's Tomb anchors a city square. Pilgrims light candles, tour guides recount the deluge, and beneath the story's surface, a deeper pattern emerges. This tale is not just remembered, it is being marketed. Across the Atlantic, the United States has taken a different approach. Less sacred ground, more spectacle. In Kentucky, the Ark Encounter, a 5-10-foot-long wooden structure built to biblical specifications, welcomed nearly 1 million visitors last year. General admission hovers around $60. Multiply that by school trips, church groups, and merch sales, and Noah suddenly becomes a multi-million-dollar franchise. Gift shops overflow with plush animals, flood survivor t-shirts, and children's storybooks bearing the same smiling patriarch. There is less theological debate and more theme park theology. And globally, Noah is far from alone. Egypt's Valley of the Kings earns hundreds of millions annually from mummy lore. In India, ancient epics like the Ramayana now fuel billion-dollar pilgrim circuits, complete with souvenir shrines and branded Dharma trails. Japan's prehistoric Jomon figures appear on everything from action figures to official stamps. Myth, when monetized, becomes more than a story. It becomes soft power. But Noah is different, claimed by Christians, Muslims, Jews, and entire nations all at once. Even museums far from ancient lands have entered the fray. In 2014, a dusty box was pulled from the basement archives of the University of Pennsylvania Museum. Inside, the skeletal remains of a Near Eastern woman dated to over 6,500 years ago, labeled inexplicably as Noah's wife. While scholars dismissed the tag as a curatorial error, the label stuck. The display drew lines of viewers, some scoffing, others praying. In the court of public opinion, a relic's truth is less important than its mystique. And yet, for all this revenue and reverence, few stop to ask, how did we get here? How did one man from an Iron Age flood myth become a 21st century tourism magnet? The roots of the myth, as we know it, do not lie in Jerusalem or even Mesopotamia, but in the shifting politics of the 11th century. Armenian monks living on the flanks of Mount Ararat began to solidify the mountain's sacred status through pilgrimage texts and monastery construction. Prior to this, the Ark had no fixed address. Its location has drifted through centuries, from the mountains of Urartu to the peaks of Kardu, even to Mount Judi, according to Islamic tradition. But by staking a theological claim on Ararat, the Armenians not only safeguarded religious identity under foreign empires, but they also forged a pilgrimage route that would last a millennium. And therein lies the twist. Faith became a territory. The territory became revenue. By the 1800s, Russian, French, and British explorers were not merely documenting supposed wood fragments. They were planting flags. Today, geopolitical tension lingers beneath the surface. Turkey and Armenia, locked in historic hostility, both lean into the Noah narrative as cultural soft power. Even NASA got pulled into the whirlwind when satellite images of a strange boat-shaped formation on Mount Ararat, captured in 1999, ignited a wave of sensational headlines. Ark found? Asked newspapers. The truth, however, was a natural rock formation, but the impact, instant pilgrimages, book deals, and a new wave of biblical tourism. In truth, Noah has become less of a man and more of a mascot, a symbolic export that nations, museums, and entertainment companies can package, display, and monetize. And perhaps this explains the real appeal. Not whether he existed, but how useful he remains. Should ancient figures become national mascots? Should a sacred patriarch be sculpted into a revenue stream? That is not a question archaeologists can answer, but it is a poll worth voting on, because here lies the deeper revelation. When we unearth Noah, we do not just dig through soil, we dig through motives, politics, and commerce dressed in sacred robes, and in doing so, we must ask one final question. So, who really wins when we dig up the past? Centuries passed, dynasties rose and fell, yet Noah's resting place remains more disputed than declared. From ancient soil samples quietly logged in a Jerusalem archive to ossuaries mislabeled in dusty corners of museums now locked to the public, we have seen how myth and memory collide. What began as a tale carved into tablets has become a chessboard of political reburials, disputed digs, and missing relics that once sat in glass cases, now nowhere to be found. And so we ask, when science brushes the bones of a prophet, who decides what story is told? The archaeologist with carbon dating in hand, or the elder who claims his grandfather saw the Ark with his own eyes? In this battle between documentation and devotion, is Noah better served by science or storytellers? Tell us, if you were to guard the legacy of a man who rebuilt the world, would you bury the truth or build a monument to the mystery?